Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. If you're a yoga practitioner or teacher who knows that there's more to yoga than poses, but you're wondering where to find that, come join our quiet little party. Here you'll find resources to help you deepen your practice, as well as insightful conversations with yoga, movement, and meditation teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. So we talk about all things gentle yoga, meditation, yin, restorative, yoga therapy, mindfulness, and more. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well this week. I am back today with a part 2 episode on this month's deeper dive theme of metta, or loving kindness. I just couldn't get it all into one episode. If you listened to that previous one from a few weeks ago, I realized that and gave you a little preview that there was going to be a part 2. So here it is. And I've been really glad to focus on this theme of metta and kindness lately, because it's a really deep topic at any time, but just in the context of what's going on in the world with the war going on in Ukraine, and then on our personal home front here, Mike and I right now each have a parent who has a serious health concern. So one on, each side of the family. So it's a lot. And just in so many ways that every day there are opportunities to practice kindness to ourselves and to those around us, and to just try to keep that frame of mind available as a way of approaching things. And it's definitely about practice, not perfection, but it's something that I'm really glad that I'm kind of thinking about and put down as a theme for us all to kind of contemplate this month. And I hope it's been useful and meaningful for you so far as well. And of course, there are good things going on too. And in a few weeks, one of these, for me, is that I'll be holding a level 1 yin yoga teacher training online. And it's not too late to join in if this is something you're interested in. This approach to yin yoga is a bit different than most, so I will let you know that. But it's, because in this training, we really treat yin as a gateway to meditation practice and a form of deep rest and energy balancing. And since these are more subtle benefits, but really benefits that everyone, I think, should have access to, I place a lot of emphasis in the training on adapting the poses to all bodies and ability levels. And you might notice, if you've been around the yin yoga world for a bit, that many of the yin trainings and books and classes don't go over the strategic use of props or how to make poses really work for a number of different bodies, or the number of different pose variations that we go over. So that's part of what makes this training special to me. And we also discuss trauma-informed principles for guiding yin yoga practice and skillful communication with your students, and just lots more. It is a really rich opportunity, I think, to take your yin practice further and or to gain confidence in sharing it with others. So we'll be starting up on March 19th, and there will be 4 online meetings of 4 hours each on Zoom, plus some additional videos that you'll do for homework and practice sessions and readings that you'll do on your own. So it's a balance, I think, schedule-wise. It's not too much screen time, and it's spaced out over several weeks, so you get to really kind of absorb what you're learning and practice. So if you're interested, go look at movedtomeditate.yoga/trainings, and all of the information is there. And you can also contact me if you have any questions. So also this week, I am starting a new term of live classes in the Move to Meditate Library membership. This is another one of the good things that's going on in my world, and I'm excited about it because the theme is hips and hamstrings in the here and now. It's a mindful therapeutic yoga series, and I called it hips and hamstrings in the here and now kind of as a cheeky way of pointing to, yes, we're going to be doing movements to help ease and balance the lower body and these kind of areas that people often complain about feeling tight or, kind of uncomfortable. But at the same time, we'll also practice presence and accepting the body exactly as it is, tight hips and all. So there we go, practice, not perfection again. So you can check my website if you're interested in joining us for the live series or catching it within the Move to Meditate library. So lots of options. All right, so there's plenty going on, and those are the updates. And let's just go ahead and dive into today's topic of metta and expand on the earlier episode that we had about this. In part 1, we started with an overview of metta practice, like what it is, where it comes from, some of the ways that it's traditionally been offered as an antidote to states like fear or anger or judgment. And I also described some of the ways of practicing metta meditation, as well as some of the suggestions I have for bringing it into your yoga or movement practice and also your everyday activities, and how to kind of be creative and have some fun with it. So for this episode, I wanted to go deeper mostly on the practice of using metta phrases, since that is the most common form of the practice that you'll encounter. And it's a great meditation practice within the greater umbrella of the mindfulness tradition from the insight meditation Buddhist school. And there are a few nuances to the phrase practice that I think can really help orient you. And we'll also talk a little bit towards the end about crafting your own metta phrases, so you develop your own relationship with the wordings that you're using. With the phrase practice, we use words to invoke the essence of metta, of kindness, or of goodwill in the mind. And it's a useful strategy for a meditation because it occupies the thinking mind with a task. Like thinking these words is a task. And that can help redirect the mind from less useful thoughts that we find ourselves having. And so that's part of why practicing metta phrases is considered to also be a form of concentration practice, as well as a heart cultivation, because the phrases are both a focal point for the mind, but also something that's developing our internal resource of kindness. And it is important to consider how we're holding these phrases, or we often call them wishes, of goodwill. When we practice metta, we are also practicing letting go of expectations. So this is a pretty important piece. The wishes are not magic spells. And unfortunately, we can't just wish and have something be so in the universe, right? They're not really meant to change external events or people. That said, sometimes when we approach a situation with more kindness, things do shift. But when I say, may you be happy or may you be healthy, I can't really expect that as an outcome, right? Necessarily. I was leading a Metta meditation once with the phrase, may all beings be safe. And then when we finished, I rang the bell and I, as I typically do, asked if there were any questions or anything people wanted to share after the meditation. And one student kind of blurted out, like he had been holding this in throughout the whole meditation, and he was kind of annoyed with me. And he blurted out, like, that's impossible. All beings are not going to be safe. That's just, like, not how the planet works. And he gave, like, this whole example of how, like, some animals are predators, and, like, lions and tigers, and it's in their nature to hunt other animals, and therefore this is totally silly, and all beings are not going to be safe. And I got what he was saying. Like, he was not wrong about that. And this is where it's important to remember that the metta phrases are not, meant to change external events or change the nature of how the world is. And as I repeat a metta wish, the conditions may or may not be there for safety or happiness or health for whoever, myself or whoever I'm wishing them to, right? But regardless of those circumstances, when I say, may you be happy, may you be healthy, I'm developing in myself an attitude of mind that can wish you well. And I do think it's kind of beautiful, maybe poetic, to hold a vision for unconditional peace and happiness and well-being for all, even when we know that the reality of the world is really far away from that. And maybe if more of us held that possibility and envisioned that, things could begin to shift in that direction. So rather than thinking of metta in terms of that external effect, it's more useful to think of the metta phrases as internal aspirations that increase our own capacity to meet life with kindness. Somewhat related to that is the other common question of, is metta different than prayer? And it is a little bit different than prayer. In metta meditation, we're not making a request of a higher being to intervene in a situation. Although I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that kind of prayer if that's part of your practice. That's beautiful, but it's different than the perspective of metta meditation. So rather than thinking about talking to anyone with my phrases, I'm thinking of it more as sending out a ripple of energy, or something. That's kind of my visual, a ripple of energy into the universe, and sending this kind of resonance of benevolence and goodwill into my own being and letting it mix around inside of me. So metta is about developing your own wise and kind heart. So a little bit different than prayer. And another frequently asked question about metta is it different than an affirmation? And kind of along the same lines, affirmations are a little bit different because they're usually present tense statements. You're taught in the affirmation practice to put your statement in the present tense, like I am healthy. Instead of may I be healthy, you would say I am healthy. And the idea of that is something like if you fully embrace that desired thought as true in the present moment, then it attracts that as your reality. Okay, so metta is a little different because it's done in the spirit of acknowledging exactly how things are right now. Like, how is it right now? There's that present moment awareness and acceptance that we train in mindfulness, right? So this is mindfulness and metta together. There's a famous, well-known Buddhist monk named Ajahn Sumedho who has this phrase. It's like kind of the core of his teaching. And the phrase is simply, it's like this. It's like this. So that's just a kind of feeling into the texture of the moment and what's true right now, the acceptance of and the seeing clearly of it's like this. So just being fully present with what is true in the moment. And then there's the warm-hearted response out of that. The heart that can also hold metta and can share in the natural desire for the blessings of greater health and ease and happiness and well-being that we all have, but without expectation. So it's grounded in the present moment, and metta is being mindful of how things are and also how we relate to our circumstances with benevolence, even if we're not currently getting what we want, which is unfortunately often the case. Right. So next I wanted to talk about what's called the categories or metta muses. So there's a traditional set of entities that we're encouraged to practice with by directing our metta towards them. So these are the categories of being, or my teacher, Heather Sundberg, often calls them muses, which I really like because it's like another reminder that we're just calling in a muse or an inspiration in our metta recipient. Like that being is kind of there in our mind to inspire our own internal development of kindness. So they're a muse. They're helping us to be inspired in this metta practice. And they sort of expand as you go through the list of the beings or the muses. They expand your range, the range of your metta, from near and close to more distant, or you might think of it as like widening the circle of your metta. So it starts with traditionally yourself, sending metta to your own little self. And then the benefactor, what's called the benefactor. So that's generally someone that you have warm feelings for and where it's not too complicated. So it could be someone you admire, or a lot of people use their pets, or just someone dear that's easy to wish well. The third category is called the dear friend. And that's where you would put someone who's a more close or intimate relationship, like a spouse or a friend or a sibling, or someone that it's a friendly relationship. It's a caring relationship. There's probably a lot of love there, but there's also probably a little more history there. And that if you spend a lot of time practicing the metta phrases towards them, you're going to feel all of that present, right? You're going to feel like all of the wonderful connection you have, but you're also probably going to have a day where you go, oh my God, I remember that one time you said this thing and I was so mad and blah, 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 blah. And that is going to be part of the process of practicing with this dear friend category, because there's just a little bit more complexity there. And that's part of the practice. That's definitely part of kind of, how we program our mind and clean our mind and train ourselves to wish well and forgive and to hold the wholeness of these relationships. So the fourth one is the neutral person. As our circle expands, it begins to expand out to people that we don't know so well. This is also sometimes called the familiar stranger. So it could be like someone that you pass in the hallway at work, or rode the elevator up with, or that you see at the store, or a neighbor you don't really know. It's someone who maybe you've encountered, but you don't really know their whole story. So that's really interesting to practice wishing well to someone, even though you're not as invested in their particulars, right? It doesn't affect you if they're happy or healthy. But you can train your heart to care for this neutral person. Then we have, dun dun dun, the difficult person. So this is a really juicy area of practice. It's probably a bit of the advanced metta practice. But this is where you work with the people who push your buttons, or the people that you disagree with. It can be people you personally know. It can be politicians, or it could be whatever it needs to be. Advice usually is to start with someone who is mildly to moderately irritating and not your number one greatest enemy, because you're just going to get too overwhelmed with reactivity, and you need to sort of build up your capacity to stay grounded and to stay mindful and to be able to actually generate some of this well-wishing in a sincere way. So we could do a whole episode on that, but I'll leave it there, that this is a possibility for the practice. And it expands ultimately to the final category of all beings everywhere, no one excluded. So, regardless of who they are and what they do and where they live, if you think they deserve it or not, all beings would be included in this circle of well-wishing. So you don't always have to practice with all of the categories in a single meditation, and especially if you're new to this, because it just practically takes quite a bit of time. I would suggest starting with 2 or 3 of the categories in a single sitting. Like you could do benefactor, self, and neutral person. Or you could practice with just self and then expand way out to all beings. So you could kind of mix that in different ways. And over time, you could rotate in the other categories and see what it feels like to practice with them. When you do decide on a category to practice with, you just choose one person or one being and bring them to mind. And sometimes you picture them, you imagine they're sitting with you, or you say their name in your head, and kind of whatever sort of brings them more into your consciousness. And that you choose that one person or one being and let them represent all of the others you could have chosen that day. Because when you think about, okay, neutral person, you probably will have a few candidates come to mind. Or if you think about dear friend, who do I want to wish, you're going to have a competition there of like, well, I should pick my spouse, or I should pick my mom, or no, I should pick, this person or whatever. And so just choose one on that day and kind of let them represent everyone who could be in that category, remembering that it's more of a muse for your own inner development. And then you can also choose someone else the next time. Like today, if I'm practicing with a neutral person, I could choose the cashier that helped me at the grocery store. And tomorrow, my neutral person practice could be a neighbor that lives nearby, but that I don't really know. So kind of like that. And so traditionally in the list, you probably noticed it started with like self, benefactor, dear friend, to neutral, to difficult, to all beings. So it starts with where it's closest with yourself, traditionally. But sometimes this can be really challenging. And to practice sending metta to yourself can actually bring up a bit too much resistance for a lot of us. And that can make it kind of hard to feel any warmth of the metta flowing. And that's not always true, but it's pretty common. So if you've had this experience, so have lots of other people, and there's nothing wrong with you. Don't worry. You can still do this practice, but you just need to like shift your strategy a little bit to get familiar with it and sort of get it in a groove. So it might work better to start where it's easier, which often means starting with the benefactor category. And a lot of teachers just teach it this way, fully expecting that a high percentage of their class will do better with this strategy of starting with the benefactor instead of starting with self. So that benefactor could be like a lovely mentor or teacher you've had in your life, or someone that you admire in the world, or like a spiritual teacher, I know some people who use the Dalai Lama. It could be like a sweet grandparent or aunt or uncle or something that you had, or your animal best friend, your pet, right? My kitty Mustache, I can tell you, makes a really fantastic muse to get my metta flowing, because it's just he's so cute. It's super easy to like wish him safety and happiness and health and ease. Like there's absolutely no resistance to that in my heart and mind. So that's a good place to start, where it's easy to get sort of familiar with the feel of metta. And even with that, if you do this practice enough, I promise there will be days where it doesn't feel like it's flowing no matter who you're working with, because you might just be like irritated or tired or in a bad mood or whatever. And one of the best teachings about metta that I heard early on in my practice was from a teacher, Donald Rothberg, who said, metta is about intention, not production. It's about intention, not production. And that was really helpful, because it acknowledges that when we're doing this practice, we're not always going to feel like that warmth and the friendliness. Sometimes it can feel really flatline. Like I'm saying the phrases, and there's just no juice there. That is normal. We also might feel like really grumpy resistance, like our mind is arguing back against a phrase. That's part of it. And we also will run into beliefs and opinions we didn't even know we had about who deserves well-being and if we have to earn it. And I talked about a little bit of that in the other episode, but all of that stuff comes up. And the practice is still working when that happens. That's part of the function, is that it sort of reveals these habit patterns of mind. So we can see them, so we can bring them into consciousness, and that's how they begin to change. So if you have practiced metta meditation with me before, you've probably heard some version close to this of my phrases, which shift and change a little bit over time, but I usually use something kind of like these. So I'm going to say my phrases for you. May I be safe and protected from harm. Or the pronoun could change to may you be safe and protected from harm, or may all beings be safe and protected from harm. So that's true on all of these. May I be safe and protected from harm. May I be happy in the midst of how things are. May I be healthy, strong, and whole. May I live with ease of well-being. So traditionally, the format of the phrases is kind of 4 pieces: safety, and then mental well-being, which we can call happiness, physical well-being, which usually we call health, and then peace or ease, or kind of a sense of life moving forward with some flow and ease, something in that frame. So you can keep that framework of 4 pieces, 4 elements, and then adjust the specific wordings. And of course, you're welcome to use mine. There's no reason not to use them, or, other versions that you might find that you like in other guided meditations, or just Googling this online to get ideas. But I feel like to really develop a relationship with this practice, it might help to craft your own wordings and spend a little time kind of thinking about what words really resonate the most for you. So you can use someone else's phrases as a starting point and then just sort of play around a little and refine them for yourself. Like, for example, I came up with these on retreat at one point, and my happy phrase is, may I be happy in the midst of how things are. And not everyone says that part, in the midst of how things are. That was me, right? I added that last part as a kind of it felt like I needed that kind of reality check of things might be weird, things might suck, but may I also know the happiness that is available. To me, it's a wish of may I also know the moments of goodness, and may I not totally fixate on all that's wrong, but also be able to appreciate what's beautiful and delightful. So I kind of pack all that meaning into this one little phrase of, may I be happy in the midst of how things are. I also had a student once who expressed that the word happy didn't work at all for her. And this is because she had had too many experiences as a child of being told basically to suppress any of her negative feelings, not to show anger, not to show, frustration or fear or whatever, but to just smile, be happy. And so that never felt authentic to her. And even adding my little extra in the midst of how things are, that word happy just still didn't resonate for her. And so this is good practice for her to reflect on. And I think what she came up with was something like, may I feel content, or may I enjoy what's good, or something like that. So you can really kind of take the essence and personalize it. And that will probably deepen your practice and your relationship with this energy of metta. This can also be really important with the health one too, especially for any practitioners or any part of our life because this can happen for many or most of us, that we'll be facing an illness or a health challenge of some kind. And so you could try, instead of may I be healthy, you could try something like, may I be as healthy as possible, or may I be supported in healing, or may I enjoy the measure of health that I have. So you can play around and see what feels the most appropriate, most resonant. When you develop your own phrases, just a couple last tips, I would say try to keep them somewhat concise, since you're going to be repeating them again and again. And if it's 4 lines long, it's going to be hard. You're going to get tripped up when you try to recite it. You're going to kind of forget your words, and if they're too elaborate, and you'll struggle to memorize them. And at first you might want to write them down on a Post-it note or something where you can glimpse down at it in your meditation, but ultimately it will work better if you can kind of get them ingrained and get them in your system and learn them fairly quickly, so it feels more like meditation than reading your journal. Okay, so keep them somewhat concise. And I would also suggest keeping them fairly broad, or broad enough in the wordings so that they can apply to you yourself, but also to the different categories of being or muses, without having to change the words too much. Because it's really interesting when you can use the same phrases for the different categories. Like when you can go from sincerely sending the wish to yourself over to using the exact same words to send metta to a neutral person you don't know. Can you like stretch to send them the same wish you sent yourself? Or even your difficult person du jour. Like, can you send them the same wish, the same wordings of kindness that you used for yourself? So that can be really interesting. And there is still more that I could say about metta. I really love this practice, and I could talk about it, I guess, endlessly, but hopefully this is enough for now to help you get started and refine and personalize your own metta practice. And if you do want the deeper dive worksheet that I made for this month on metta, it has a little bit more on the phrase possibilities and a few more suggestions. If you haven't downloaded it from the email yet, or if you aren't on the email list, you can go on my website and just get on the email list so you can have a copy of the worksheet, which might kind of help if you're getting into this process of studying metta. So I will be resending that next week, the worksheet, along with a recorded metta meditation. So if you're on my website, just look for the email sign up box, and you'll be all set. So that's it. Thank you, as always, for listening. And I do hope this has been useful. And I'm very open to your comments and your feedback and anything that you want to share with me about how you're using these podcasts or worksheets or any of the materials. And also, I thank you for any practice that you are out there doing that increases the kindness circulating in the world. We need it, as always. So keep going, and I will talk to you next week. So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find us that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, live online classes, teacher trainings, and private lessons, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. Thanks so much for listening.